Some people think the law is a weapon, a sword to be wielded in a courtroom. They're wrong. The law isn't a sword, it's a fortress. And for 20 years, I was the architect of the most impenetrable fortress in the world of infrastructure finance. My name is Alara Vance, and this is the story of how a man who stole my blueprints tried to demolish my life's work, only to find he was trapped inside the very walls he thought he owned. It all started, as these things so often do, with a celebration I had no interest in attending. We were closing the acquisition of a European logistics giant, a $1.2 billion deal. In the main boardroom at Apex Infrastructure Partners, champagne corks were popping. Our CEO was laughing, slapping our new general counsel Marcus Finch on the back. They were celebrating a victory. In my office, 30 floors below, I was ensuring it wasn't a catastrophe. I had the final agreement on my screen, all 312 pages of it. The deal was done. The signatures were drying. But something was bothering me, a single clause in an indemnification appendix that felt loose, a thread out of place in a tapestry I had woven myself. My fingers moved across the keyboard, cross-referencing the clause with German transport regulations I had memorized a decade ago, and there it was, a loophole. A tiny, elegant little oversight by the other side that, if left untouched, would have exposed us to a 9-figure liability 6 months down the road. While they drank champagne, I quietly drafted a 1-sentence amendment, attached it to a polite email to the seller's counsel, and received a resigned, "Fine, agreed," 3 minutes later. I saved the company $150 million. No one ever knew. That was my job. I was the guardian of the foundation. They were just tenants living in the penthouse. The foundation was called the Aegis Framework. I didn't just write it. I breathed life into it. It was our company's entire philosophy for mergers and acquisitions, a complex, interlocking system of contracts, governance rules, and ethical covenants that made our growth possible and our structure invincible. It was why we never had a failed integration, why no one ever dared a hostile takeover. The framework was our soul. And it was a promise. I remembered sitting with our founder, Arthur Graves, years ago. He was old school, a man who built this empire on a handshake and his word, but he wasn't naive. He saw the way the world was changing. He called the new breed of executives empty suits. Men with great hair and perfect teeth who could talk for an hour without saying a single thing of substance. We were in his library, the smell of old books and leather in the air. He handed me a heavy, leather-bound folder. Inside were the first drafts of our foundational integrity covenant. He looked at me, his eyes still sharp and clear. "This framework, Alara," he said, his voice raspy, "it's the company's conscience, and you are its guardian. Promise me you'll protect it." I promised. The Aegis Framework wasn't just my life's work. It was my solemn vow to a great man. 6 months after Arthur passed away, Marcus Finch arrived. He was the perfect empty suit. Tall, handsome, with a voice as smooth and deep as a cello. He wore Tom Ford suits and a Patek Philippe watch. He charmed the board instantly with presentations that were beautiful, glossy, and completely devoid of original thought. They were my thoughts, my strategies, lifted wholesale from the Aegis framework I had written, which he shamelessly rebranded as the Finch Strategy. He was a plagiarist with a corner office. He summoned me for a performance review on a Tuesday morning. The air in his office was sterile, smelling faintly of citrus cleaner and ambition. He gestured for me to sit, a magnanimous smile on his face. He slid a document across his vast, empty desk. It was a standard-issue performance improvement plan. I recognized it instantly. I had designed the template myself 8 years prior. He began to speak, his voice laced with a kind of practiced, condescending sympathy. He used my own words, my own metrics, and twisted them into weapons against me. My meticulous risk analysis was now evidence that I was risk-averse. My unwavering focus on stable governance was reframed as an inability to innovate in a dynamic marketplace. The final insult was the most exquisitely ironic. "Your work, Alara," he said, leaning forward for emphasis, "has become inconsistent with the forward-facing vision of the firm." He, a man whose entire reputation was built on plagiarizing my work, was firing me. the architect of consistency itself, for being inconsistent. The sheer audacity of it was almost breathtaking. He picked up his Mont Blanc pen. With a smooth, wet click, he signed my termination papers. Effective immediately. He thought he was signing an execution order. He had no idea he was signing his own. My reaction to being fired was, I imagine, disappointing to anyone expecting a scene. There was no shouting, no tears. My emotions simply receded, replaced by a profound and crystalline calm. This was not a tragedy. It was a trigger event, a legal condition that had now been satisfied. I went back to my office. The news had not yet spread. I began to pack. The movements were methodical, almost ritualistic. I didn't throw things into boxes. I curated my departure. The legal texts I had accumulated over 20 years, I left for the junior associates. The deal binders, the physical record of the fortress I had built, I left in their shelves. They were no longer my concern. I packed my personal effects. A framed photo of me and Arthur Graves at the opening of our London office. A small, smooth stone from a beach in Normandy. A silver pen my father gave me when I graduated law school. And finally, from a locked drawer in my desk, I retrieved a single slim folder. It was bound in dark blue leather, the paper inside heavy and watermarked. It was the original founder-signed copy of the Apex Integrity Covenant, my promise to Arthur, made manifest in ink and paper. I placed it in my briefcase. It was the only thing I needed. As I walked to the elevator, Marcus Finch strode past me, talking loudly on his phone about the upcoming IPO. He gave me a brief, dismissive nod, a final assertion of his dominance, the king dismissing a courtier. He had no idea the courtier had just poisoned the wine. At home, my apartment was quiet. The city of Kiev hummed below my window. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't call a friend. I sat at my desk, opened the leather-bound covenant, and turned to a page I knew by heart. Article 9, Section 4, the Praetorian Clause. Arthur and I had crafted it in his library over a month. It was his ultimate defense against the empty suits, his legacy's bodyguard. The clause was simple in its brutal elegance. It stated that a key designated officer of the company could not be terminated without a 75% supermajority vote of the board of directors, and the covenant's appendix clearly defined that officer, the head of transactional governance, my exact title. If that condition was breached, a contingent voting bloc, 20% of Arthur's own founders' shares, held in a legally unassailable third-party escrow, would be automatically and irrevocably transferred into the Apex Employee Governance Trust. I was the designated officer. My termination was the breach. Marcus Finch, in his arrogant haste, had never held a board vote. He had acted alone. He thought he was swatting a fly. He had no idea he was tripping the most sophisticated alarm system in corporate America. I placed my signed termination letter on my scanner. The machine whirred softly, digitizing the instrument of my execution and transforming it into the key to my revenge. I drafted a new email. It was short, formal, and lethally precise. The recipient was the senior partner at a law firm in London, an institution so old and respected they probably had a quill and ink department. They were the legally appointed escrow agent. The subject line was simple: notification of trigger event, Apex Integrity Covenant. The body of the email was just 2 sentences, citing the article and section of the covenant and confirming that the attached document satisfied the condition for execution. I attached the scanned PDF of my termination letter. My finger hovered over the mouse. I looked at the picture of Arthur on my desk. A quiet promise, kept across the years. I clicked send. The time was 6:15 p.m. An automated reply appeared in my inbox less than a second later. Receipt confirmed. The terms of the covenant will be executed at midnight Coordinated Universal Time. The trap was set. The clock was ticking. The walls I had built were about to close in. The next morning, I did not go to the office. Instead, I made coffee, sat on my balcony overlooking the Dnieper River, and opened a financial news feed on my tablet. I knew the show was about to begin. At Apex headquarters, Marcus Finch was having the best day of his life. He was kicking off the roadshow for the company's IPO. It was his masterpiece, the culmination of his vision. The deal would make him a legend, and incidentally, would trigger a $40 million bonus for him personally. He stood at the head of the main boardroom, radiating a confidence so profound it was practically a physical force. The bankers from Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan hung on his every word. His presentation was, I'm sure, flawless, glossy, and completely unaware of the tectonic shift happening deep beneath his feet. The first sign of trouble would have been subtle. A senior banker's phone vibrating on the polished table, a discreet glance at the screen, a slight furrowing of the brow, then another phone would buzz, and another, a quiet, spreading infection of anxiety. The call would have come from the bank's own legal department. The tone would have been urgent, bordering on panic. The IPO was frozen, effective immediately. The reason would have been a single devastating notification received minutes earlier from the Underwriters' Council. It stated that they had been alerted by a London-based escrow agent of a material and as yet undisclosed change in the voting structure of Apex Infrastructure Partners. 20% of the company's control, a block of shares previously thought to be stable founders' stock, had just been transferred. The new owner, the Apex Employee Governance Trust, the IPO prospectus, the foundational document for the entire deal, was now inaccurate. A lie. The timeline was dead. The deal was dead. Billions of dollars and Marcus Finch's reputation were now on hold, indefinitely. The chaos that followed must have been a sight to behold. I imagined Marcus, his perfect smile frozen on his face, trying to bluster his way through it. He would have assured everyone it was a clerical error, a misunderstanding, but the bankers would have already been packing their briefcases. They don't deal in misunderstandings. They deal in risk. And the risk profile of Apex had just gone supernova. The board would have called an emergency meeting. I pictured Marcus in the center of it, a storm of angry questions raining down on him. He would have been barking at his junior lawyers, demanding they find the source of this. He would have been frantically skimming through the digital copies of the company's governance documents, the very files he had copied and pasted to build his career. He would have been looking for a loophole, a clause, anything. But he wouldn't find it. You can't find a flaw in a blueprint you've never actually read. He was an architect, staring at the ruins of his own building, with no idea where the load-bearing walls had been. He was a plagiarist, finally being asked to produce an original thought. And he had nothing. My phone rang at 3 p.m. It was the chairman of the board. His voice was strained. "Alara," he said, "we need you to come in." "There's a situation." "I know," I replied. "I'll be there in an hour." I chose my outfit with care. A simple, dark gray dress. Understated, professional, a suit of armor made of silk and wool. When I stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor, the atmosphere was thick with fear. The open-plan office, usually buzzing with energy, was silent. People stared at me as I walked past. A ghost returned to haunt the living. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew it had something to do with me. The chairman's assistant tried to usher me into the main boardroom, where the emergency meeting was still underway. I politely declined. "I'm here to see Marcus," I said. My heels clicked with a slow, steady rhythm on the polished concrete floor. It was the only sound in the vast, silent space. The walk to his corner office felt like 100 miles. His door was closed. I didn't knock. He was inside, standing by his window, his back to me. His tie was loosened, his jacket off. He looked smaller without it. His 2 lawyers were there, looking pale and useless. He must have heard the door open, because he turned, and when he saw me, his face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "What did you do?" he seethed. I didn't answer right away. I walked over to his ridiculously large desk. The one he had bragged was made from a single 500-year-old tree, and placed the leather-bound integrity covenant on its surface. The soft thud of the old leather on the polished wood was shockingly loud in the silent room. I opened it to a specific page. Article 9, Section 4. I slid it across the desk towards him. "You never actually read this, did you, Marcus?" I asked, my voice calm and even. "The foundations. You were always more interested in the penthouse." He stared at the page. His eyes, which moments ago were burning with anger, were now clouded with confusion. He began to read. I watched him. I saw the subtle twitch in his jaw as he scanned the first sentence. I saw the color drain from his face as he reached the part about the key designated officer, and I saw the dawning, sickening horror in his eyes as he finally understood the words, irrevocably transferred. Arthur and I wrote this clause, I explained, my voice as neutral as if I were dictating a memo, to protect the company from men exactly like you, men who see documents as props, not as architecture. Men who are so blinded by their own ambition, they never bother to check the foundations of the house they're trying to sell. The board never held a supermajority vote to approve my termination, I continued. Your signature on that piece of paper you pushed across your desk so arrogantly yesterday was the trigger. By firing me, you breached the covenant. You just gave 20% of this company's voting power to the employees. The IPO is dead until that trust approves it. And right now, the only person the employees in that trust will listen to is me. He looked up from the page, his face a ruin. The polished mask was gone. He was just a terrified man, stripped bare by a few paragraphs he had been too lazy to read. I leaned forward slightly, my hands flat on his desk. My voice dropped to a cool, precise whisper. You plagiarized the blueprints. Then you took a sledgehammer to your own foundation. Congratulations on the promotion, Marcus. The emergency board meeting that followed was a formality, a surrender. With 20% of the company's voting power now held by an employee trust that I effectively controlled, the old power dynamics were irrelevant. I held all the cards. The trust had only one demand, that I be reinstated, not to my old position, but as the new general counsel of Apex Infrastructure Partners. The board, cornered, shaken, and frankly deeply impressed, agreed unanimously. My first act as general counsel was to draft the termination letter for Marcus Finch, fired for cause, for gross negligence and violation of his fiduciary duties, a clean, professional, and utterly devastating end to his career. The IPO was, of course, restructured. It relaunched 3 months later. In the new prospectus, a document I personally edited, there was a bold new section. It highlighted the revolutionary Apex Employee Governance Trust, framing it not as a risk, but as our single greatest asset, a testament to our commitment to integrity and long-term stability. The market loved it. The IPO was a massive success. A few weeks later, the American Lawyer magazine ran a feature story. The headline was The Architect. It detailed the brilliant, hidden legal structure I had built, calling the Aegis framework a new paradigm in corporate governance. I was hailed as a quiet visionary. My life's work, which Marcus had dismissed as inconsistent, was now the subject of case studies at Harvard and Yale. But the final act of my revenge was the most satisfying. The $40 million bonus Marcus had been anticipating from the IPO was, naturally, clawed back by the board. They asked for my recommendation on how to reallocate the funds. I had a suggestion. 6 months later, I stood on a small stage in a beautifully renovated building downtown. It was a dedication ceremony. We had used Marcus's bonus to fund a new, state-of-the-art pro bono legal clinic for technology and infrastructure startups, a place to help a new generation of founders build their companies on solid foundations. I gave a short speech thanking the board and celebrating the legacy of our founder, Arthur Graves. Then I pulled the cord on a velvet curtain, unveiling a polished marble plaque in the main lobby. It read, The Arthur Graves and Ilara Vance Center for Corporate Integrity, my name permanently etched in stone, my legacy, intertwined with my mentors, all paid for by the man who tried to erase me. He had tried to demolish my work, but the paper walls I had built were stronger than his ambition, stronger than his arrogance. They were stronger than stone, and in the end, they were all that was left standing.